This is a history hot tip. Around 2,500 years ago, a little-known tribe from what is today Iran began to conquer the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe, establish one of the largest empires in ancient history, ruling over 49 provinces and stretching from Central Asia to the Mediterranean Sea. At its peak, the empire controlled about 30% of the world's population and facilitated trade between the furthest corners of their domain. Today, the legacy of this empire lives on through the people of Iran, who still tell stories about their glorious past and the many ways they changed the world. But who are these mysterious people, and how did they build such a vast empire? To find out, we have to travel back in time to the mountains of Persia. Welcome to the channel. Before there was even an empire, there was a prince. Cyrus the Great wasn't born into royalty. In fact, he was born into obscurity. His dad was just a small local lord who ruled over a tiny part of the mountains in a region called Pars. Back then, Pars was just one among many tribes who lived along the Zagros Mountains. There were the Medians to the north, the Lydians to the east, many others scattered throughout the fertile lands of the Middle East. But while all these tribes squabbled amongst themselves, the young Cyrus dreamed of uniting them all under one banner. He envisioned a vast empire that would stretch from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas, where people of all races and religions could live together in peace. Unfortunately for Cyrus, his dream didn't match up with the harsh reality of the ancient Middle East. As a small mountain tribe, the Pars had few resources and even fewer friends. Their only ally was a nomadic tribe called the Caspians, who were known for their horsemanship. Luckily, when Cyrus came of age, his father stepped down and gave him the throne. Cyrus immediately set about modernizing his army, which consisted mostly of cavalry, light infantry, and archers. Under his leadership, the Pars grew stronger every year, and soon they would need that power because disaster struck in the form of an invading Median army, led by a man named Cyaxares. Although the Pars put up a valiant fight, they were ultimately defeated. But it was not a total defeat. After the battle, Cyrus gathered his remaining troops and escaped to the mountains. There he regrouped with his allies, the Caspian horsemen, and launched a surprise attack on the Median capital. To everyone's surprise, he won and Median rule in Pars came to an end. But Cyrus wasn't done yet. He went on to conquer the rest of the nearby tribes and unite the Persians under one banner. Now that he had a loyal army at his command, Cyrus felt ready to conquer the rest of the Middle East and fulfill his destiny. His first target was Lydia, the prosperous kingdom that controlled much of modern Turkey and western Iran. According to legend, the Lydian king Croesus was so wealthy that he was known throughout the ancient world as the richest man on earth. And indeed, when Cyrus's armies reached the Lydian border, he hesitated to attack, but he knew that if he didn't do something drastic, someone else would come along and take his power. So against his better judgment, he declared war. The two armies met in the plain of Tyria. The Lydians had more soldiers, but the Persians had better generals. Cyrus and his brother Cambyses split the Lydian forces in half, trapping King Croesus and his elite troops in the middle. Despite being outnumbered, the Lydians fought bravely and managed to hold off the Persians for 5 days. But eventually the Persians broke through and took the Lydian king prisoner. When Croesus heard that Cyrus had conquered the nearby kingdom of Media, he thought the Persians must be gods. He asked Cyrus why he had spared him, to which Cyrus replied, "I spared you because I have heard of your wisdom and your valor." Either way, Cyrus let Croesus go, probably because he didn't want to waste time on a long siege. Instead, he marched south toward Babylon. Most historians agree that Cyrus conquered Babylon by force, but some think he may have actually taken the throne peacefully after marrying the last Babylonian queen, Nitocris. We don't know for sure, but either way, Cyrus ended the 2,000-year reign of the Babylonians and brought them under the rule of the Achaemenid Empire. Over the next few decades, his successors continued expanding the empire and conquering new lands. Cambyses II conquered Egypt and built a new capital at Memphis. Darius I extended the empire to Central Asia and introduced a new system of provinces ruled by satraps, which were like governors. Soon the Achaemenids stretched from the Balkans to Pakistan and from eastern Turkey to northern Iran. But despite their massive size, the empire was surprisingly stable. This was due in large part to the introduction of the royal road, a series of roads and stations that stretched across the entire empire, allowing messengers to deliver messages in only 7 days. Another reason was the introduction of a new system of government. Unlike previous empires, the Achaemenids incorporated the people they conquered into their empire instead of just ruling over them. For example, they allowed local rulers to keep their jobs as long as they paid taxes and followed the emperor's laws. They also tolerated other religions and even encouraged trade between different provinces. At its peak, the empire's wealth was staggering. The treasury contained gold, silver, and precious gems collected from all over the empire. But no matter how rich or powerful the emperors were, they knew they couldn't rule over such a huge domain forever. So to make sure their empire lasted as long as possible, they took steps to make it hereditary. While there were many contenders for the throne, in the end, it was Darius's son Xerxes who inherited the empire and cemented his family's legacy. Xerxes ascended to the throne in 486 BC when he took power. He inherited a stable, well-organized empire that was full of diverse cultures and peoples. One of the first things he did was consolidate his power and crush any rebellions. He then spent the next several years building projects around the empire, such as palaces, temples, and roads. Most famously, he built a new capital at Persepolis, which quickly became the center of the empire. But while Xerxes was busy consolidating power and building projects, the Greeks in the West weren't sitting around twiddling their thumbs. In 480 BC, the Greeks formed an alliance and prepared to defend their homeland against the mighty Persian army. It started with the Battle of Thermopylae, where a small band of Spartans held off a massive Persian army for 8 days. Though the Spartans were eventually defeated, they bought enough time for the rest of the Greek army to prepare for battle. Ultimately, the Persians were defeated at sea and on land and forced to retreat home. Historians debate whether or not Xerxes really marched on Greece again after the failed invasion, but it doesn't really matter. By the time he took on the Greeks, the Persian army was already weakened and divided. And as the empire grew older, it got harder and harder to keep control over such a large domain. After Xerxes died in 465 BC, the empire quickly began to fall apart. First, the Egyptians revolted and threw off the yoke of the Persian emperors. Then several of the Asian provinces followed suit. The empire had become too big to rule effectively, and without strong leadership, it fell into decline. Over the next century, the once mighty empire was completely destroyed. The last Achaemenid king, the great King Bacabazo, was assassinated in 330 BC by one of his generals, Alexander the Great. But even though the empire was gone, its legacy lived on in the many ways it changed the world, though it only existed for about 200 years. The Achaemenid Empire was one of the most influential in ancient history. They introduced many innovations in government, law, and architecture that influenced the ancient world. Their system of satrapies or provinces made it easier to rule over a vast empire by dividing it into smaller, more manageable units. The royal road helped facilitate trade and communication throughout the empire. Their legal code, known as the Cyrus Cylinder, was one of the earliest examples of human rights. It guaranteed freedom of religion, movement, and assembly, and prohibited torture. Their architectural achievements were also impressive. Persepolis was one of the most magnificent cities in the ancient world, filled with palaces, temples, and gardens. Many of their buildings were decorated with intricate carvings depicting scenes from their culture and history. Even after the empire fell, its influence could still be seen in the art and architecture of the surrounding regions. Despite its many accomplishments, the Achaemenid Empire has often been overshadowed by other ancient empires like the Greeks, Romans, and Carthaginians. But without the Achaemenids, the ancient world would have been very different. They pioneered many concepts that would later become commonplace, such as religious tolerance, representative government, and public works projects. The ancient Persians showed the world that it is possible for people of different cultures and religions to live together in peace and harmony. They also showed that a large empire can be stable and prosperous if it's well organized and managed. Lastly, they proved that even a small tribe from the mountains can build an empire that stretches from one end of the earth to the other. So the next time you hear about the ancient Greeks or Romans, take a moment to remember the Persians, the forgotten builders of the First World Empire. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe for more content. And special thanks to our supporters who make videos like this one possible. a vast empire built by one man in just 12 years. He set his sights on unifying the entire known world, not through brutality, but through wisdom and diplomacy. His armies may have been the largest ever assembled, but he was no warmonger. In fact, he's the only conqueror in history to have never waged a single war. So how did he do it? How did he become the greatest king in history? This is Cyrus the Great, the man who built an empire on kindness. His story starts with humble beginnings. In today's modern Turkey, around 300 miles from Istanbul, deep in the mountains, lived a small tribe of nomadic goat herders. They were poor, their land was barren, and they were constantly at risk of being raided by neighboring tribes. And yet, according to legend, they had one priceless possession, a handsome young prince named Cyrus. Even as a child, he displayed traits that set him apart. He loved exploring the world around him, and would often climb up high places, like mountains or tall trees, so that he could look out over the land and imagine what it would be like to rule over all of it. His mother was a local chieftain, but his father was a mystery. Legend said he was the son of a king from a faraway land who fell in love with his mother while hunting in the area. But then he had to go back to his kingdom, and he left behind his wife and unborn child, never to return. As a result, when Cyrus grew older, he felt compelled to find his real father, believing that he deserved to know who he was and where he came from. But first, he had to get out of his mom's village. At age 18, he took some of his tribe's goats and moved into the mountains to live on his own. This was a difficult task, but Cyrus was determined to make it work. He quickly learned how to survive off the land and protect himself against wild animals. He hunted deer for food, crafted clothing from animal skins, and made weapons to defend himself. It wasn't long before he had everything he needed to survive. When he looked out over his domain from a mountaintop, he knew this was just the beginning. Soon after, he returned to his mother's village and married his cousin, a wedding gift from his mother's tribe. She was supportive of his goals, and together, they had 2 sons. At this point, Cyrus was ready to take the next step. He gathered his followers and launched a series of surprise attacks against neighboring tribes. He was smart, cunning, and brave, and soon the other tribes had no choice but to submit to his rule. After expanding his territory, he settled down and focused on improving the lives of the people under his rule. He abolished slavery, encouraged free trade, and established courts to settle disputes. However, he still wasn't satisfied. He dreamed of building a great empire, but to do that, he needed more power. So he turned his attention towards the nearby kingdom of Anshan. When he arrived, the locals weren't too happy to see him. Anshan had been an independent and prosperous kingdom for many years, and didn't want to be ruled by a young upstart. But Cyrus wasn't deterred. Instead, he negotiated a treaty with them, agreeing to help them fight their enemies in exchange for their loyalty. It wasn't long before they were calling him king. From there, Cyrus continued to expand his territory. Everywhere he went, he offered the same deal: help them fight their enemies, and in exchange, you'll be loyal to me. Most rulers would use force to take over new lands, but Cyrus preferred diplomacy. This worked wonders for his reputation because when he took over a new city, he didn't punish the people or burn it to the ground. He helped rebuild it. He repaired damaged buildings, funded infrastructure projects, and helped improve the lives of ordinary citizens. He was even known to hold feasts, inviting people from all over the world and letting them sample the delicious cuisine of his lands. In fact, he liked food so much that he started the first international postal service to ensure that he could receive rare delicacies like pomegranates, figs, and grapes wherever he was. His goal was to create a massive web of alliances that would eventually extend across the entire known world. It was working. Cyrus had now defeated dozens of enemy tribes and kings and brought them all together under one banner. People of his empire were diverse, speaking different languages and worshiping different gods. But Cyrus didn't care. He believed that diversity was a strength, not a weakness, and treated everyone equally regardless of their background. He also implemented major legal reforms, creating the world's first human rights charter called the Cyrus Cylinder. It stated that all people within the empire were equal under the law and had the right to life, liberty, and property. He also abolished slavery and torture and established a system of checks and balances to prevent any one person from having too much power. It's no wonder why historians consider him the most progressive ruler of his time. In addition to these reforms, he also appointed competent people in positions of authority, regardless of their social status. If someone was qualified for a job, he gave them the position. If they did well, he rewarded them with more responsibility and power. This led to a rapid increase in the efficiency of the government and the prosperity of the empire. There was just one problem. Not everyone was happy with the new order. As Cyrus's empire grew, so did the resentment of those who had been conquered. They longed for the days when they were independent and free to rule themselves. And secretly, they were plotting to overthrow Cyrus and restore their independence. They had been waiting for years for the perfect opportunity to strike back, and soon they would get it. One day, while Cyrus was away on a trip, a group of rebels attacked his palace and murdered him. His body was never recovered, and neither were the bodies of his wife and sons who were killed in the attack. Although he was dead, though, his empire lived on. See, before he died, he had appointed one of his generals, a former soldier named Cambyses, to be his heir. Cambyses was eager to prove himself worthy of Cyrus's legacy, and set about expanding the empire even further. He conquered Egypt and Libya, and added them to Cyrus's domain, making it the largest empire the world had ever seen. But despite his military successes, he wasn't as beloved as his father. He was cruel, impulsive, and irresponsible, and he alienated many of the people Cyrus had won over. For example, after taking over Egypt, he unleashed his army on the locals, killing hundreds of innocent people and destroying their cities. He also appointed unqualified people to positions of power and neglected his duties as pharaoh. As a result, many Egyptians came to resent him and longed for the return of Cyrus, whom they saw as a benevolent ruler. However, Cambyses was not done yet. After 5 years of ruling, he became obsessed with conquering the Greek city-states and marched his army across the Aegean Sea to do battle with them. But he underestimated the Greeks and suffered a humiliating defeat. He retreated back to Persia, defeated and demoralized. Soon after, he died under mysterious circumstances, leaving his empire in the hands of his brother, Cyrus the Great. Now, unlike Cambyses, Darius was wise, level-headed, and diplomatic. He realized that the only way to hold on to power was to win the support of the people. So he spent his days traveling around the empire, meeting with local leaders and learning about their cultures. He also made several important administrative changes that helped stabilize the empire. For example, he reorganized the government, created a new tax system, and developed a standardized currency. These reforms helped ensure that the empire would be financially stable for years to come. In addition to his administrative reforms, Darius also pursued a policy of religious tolerance. He believed that people should be free to worship whatever god they wanted without fear of persecution. This policy helped to quell the resentment that many Persians felt towards Cyrus's memory and made him very popular throughout the empire. Darius also continued his father's tradition of building infrastructure and undertaking massive public works projects. He built roads, bridges, aqueducts, and public buildings throughout the empire. And these projects not only helped improve the lives of ordinary people, but also served as a reminder of his accomplishments as ruler. Despite all his efforts, though, there were still some people who resented his family's rule. They plotted and schemed, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. But Darius was too smart for them. He had spies everywhere and was always aware of their activities, crushed every single rebellion, and made sure that no one would ever challenge his authority again. In the end, he was able to create a lasting legacy that would outlive him. His empire would go on to conquer more land and build even greater monuments. But none of them would ever forget the legacy of kindness that was started by one man in the mountains, the legacy of Cyrus the Great. Now check out who was Genghis Khan and why he's considered the evilest man in history. Or click this other video instead.